What better way to start a video about spooky lost media than by discussing a topic that is so mysterious it might not even exist, which is fascinating in itself, as the answer about it is up for speculation and debate, even after decades of time. I always find these kinds of topics particularly interesting for their unconfirmed nature and the circumstances surrounding why this piece of lost media allegedly went missing are quite unsettling on their own. One of the deepest categories of lost media comes from the cinema side of content, but one in particular became the subject of controversy when debates surrounding its existence were questioned. This film is called Las Noches del Hombre Lobo, which is referred to as Nights of the Werewolf in English. And it's a film about a professor who learns that one of his students suffers from lycanthropy and uses him as a tool of revenge under the guise of attempting to help him. It was produced in 1968 by horror film director René Govar and shot in Paris in 5 weeks, starring Paul Naschy, who is famous for his body of other werewolf and horror films. But unlike the rest of the films in Naschy's filmography, this one cannot be viewed, and in fact, it's apparently never been seen before, because the film ended up completely lost before it was even finalized. According to Naschy, the director of the film died in a car crash after the film was sent off to the lab for processing, and it was never recovered, apparently being impounded and misplaced or discarded. Naschy left Paris after filming, so even he was unsure about what happened to the film, but recalls working with Govar on the script and going to Paris for filming. Despite these recollections, there has never been proof documented that any of this happened, with no records of René Govar having existed in Paris film archives, and the names of the other actors who appeared in the film seeming to not exist either. The story about what happened to the director also changes depending on the source, with some claims that state he died in a car crash with the film in his possession, so it never made it to the processing lab to begin with. It's for these discrepancies and unconfirmed claims that have led many people to believe the film never existed to begin with, and it was a hoax that Paul Naschy made up to boost his resume at a time when he needed more credits to his name. However, Naschy insisted the film existed all the way until his death. There really isn't anything online available that can be searched for or looked through for more information one way or the other. Though there is a Paul Naschy website with a section that discusses the mystery of this film, and has some interesting details in it. Firstly, it mentions a quote from Naschy that states, "I was at the French Film Archives not too long ago, and I believe they've conserved a trailer for the film, but not the film itself. Perhaps someday it will surface. I don't know. I've tried to locate it, but I haven't had any results." As far as I could tell, no one has ever seen the trailer for this film either that was allegedly saved, but if that did exist, it would without a doubt confirm the film existed too. However, no footage of this trailer has ever been documented, which brings me to the second notable part of this website, which contains an image of what has been claimed to be the only surviving piece of this film, and it commonly gets passed around as such. However, it's confirmed at the bottom of the page that this image is from a makeup test for a completely different film, and not Nights of the Werewolf. There's even another point made further on the page that describes Naschy as not always getting his facts straight, but there's always some truth to them. The existence of this film is definitely up for debate, and it comes down to what the claims lead you to believe, about whether or not there's a lost horror film out there that no one has ever seen. This wouldn't be an LSSQ video without some cartoon lost media, and I could definitely use something a little more lighthearted right now. This topic actually doubles as a recent search as well, because there's a thread on the Lost Media Wiki forums that got pretty popular recently, and is a large reason why the search is gaining attention, aside for the fact that the content itself is pretty unsettling, especially for Nickelodeon standards. We've discussed lots of lost bumpers and promos on the channel before, and even though they're not my favorite category of content to search for, I'm definitely becoming more interested in them because it seems like searches are starting to form around the more interesting ones. In my last video, we discussed a short called Ed, Ed y Eduardo that Cartoon Network aired in the summer of 2006, as a crossover that replaced Eddie with Eduardo from Foster's Home. While it was stated to be a relatively rough edit of the character, it still sounds like a fun piece of content. But in comparison, that makes the bumper we're going to talk about today even more unique than that. A year or so ago, there was a topic that made the rounds online, which discussed a series of bumpers that aired on Nickelodeon and featured zombie versions of their popular characters, complete with visual edits, groaning sounds, and special effects that you'd find in a horror movie or some kind of spooky film. For the most part, the posts that remembered their existence didn't gain any attention, and upon first glance, you might be inclined to think it was a bad attempt at a creepypasta, for the fact that Nickelodeon characters would be put in such a scary light, especially for kids watching the channel at the time. However, once the topic came to the Lost Media Wiki forums, the pieces started falling into place a little more, with the first recollections having been about a Mighty Bee version of the bumper, followed by SpongeBob, The Fairly OddParents, and even Fanboy and Chum Chum. Soon enough, more people added to the thread with more details, and remembering how scary they were, even with some claims that they had been up on the Nicktoons website at one point. This would end up being the biggest find of the search when some of the original URLs were actually found on the Wayback Machine, to prove these actually did exist. While the videos themselves couldn't be played on the Wayback Machine, we were able to save the thumbnails and figure out they were officially known as Zombified, which were aired on TV during Halloween 2012. It was pretty cool to see that Nick had actually put these on their website at one point, and maybe it's because of how accessible the internet was in 2012 that they chose to do that. I don't recall Cartoon Network having put bumpers on their site at all back in the day, but in this case, we were still going to have to find them elsewhere if we wanted to watch them. This led to some huge leads being found really quickly, as clips of the Fairly OddParents bumper and Fanboy and Chum Chum bumper were spotted in animation reels. They're not the full versions, so there's a lot of content that's missing, but it feels great to get an idea of what the animation was like, and what I found even more strange was the fact that it seems like two different people made the two different bumpers. So it seems likely that each of the four known bumpers was made by a different animator. That's pretty surprising since their short nature leads me to believe they would have all been made by one person. But we're currently making contact with these animators, so we'll be gathering more info as soon as it comes. Not only that, but there's also been some speculation that more bumpers exist besides the ones that most people remember, which could lead to an open-ended search until we get some confirmation or proof on how many exist. This is a really fun topic that I'm glad gained some attention, and collecting zombie Nicktoons shorts without knowing how many might be out there is a pretty good and spooky challenge. I've probably said this before in some other videos, but I'll say it again cause it's true. I really love the excitement of browsing the internet without having lost media in mind, but coming across a mystery that is so interesting and bizarre, it pulls me in and gets me back into the lost media mindset. You just never know what you're going to find when you casually look for pretty much anything related to media. That's when the mysteries seem to rear their head, completely unexpectedly, especially when it comes to video game content. For the amount of time and energy people have spent in documenting lost or obscure content in video games, I'm always surprised when I come across something I've never heard about before, that ended up getting buried and never looked into. I'm not even sure how I first came across this topic to begin with, but its origin is on a NeoGAF thread from 2016, so quite a long time ago. This thread is a discussion about Dr. Robotnik's Mean Beam Machine, which is mostly about gameplay elements and memories from the game, when a user by the name of Rec Roulette makes a statement about something they found in the game that has never been documented. In their comment, they state, "This game had a weird bug on the Game Gear version that would pop up an error message that said check cable with Robotnik's face that traumatized me as a kid. I love this game, awesome thread." This wasn't the first time I had heard about an instance of childhood trauma in a video game, and while I questioned how scary this screen would actually be nowadays, it was something I was interested in seeing, especially since the Game Gear version of the game is still pretty creepy looking nowadays. I was definitely curious enough to do some research on it, and began Googling for some image results, or maybe I'd find a YouTube video displaying the error screen, but I got nothing in return. I couldn't even find any sprite dump of the game, or too much discussion about it. The Game Gear version seems to be pretty obscure, and not a very big talking point online. The only other piece of content I was able to find that mentioned it was a second thread also by Rec Roulette, which I didn't bookmark and can no longer locate. But it went on to describe in more detail the mysterious nature of the error screen and how they tried to replicate it but never could, leading me to believe it was definitely more of a glitch or something that couldn't outright be triggered. The text that showed up stating to check the link cable also led me to believe it was an issue related to the connectivity of the game, if one was to play multiplayer. But Rec Roulette never said they were playing multiplayer, and I don't think that would exactly be described as a bug, so the exact details of how it was activated are not known. At one point, I was going to track down 2 Game Gears, 2 copies of the game, and a link cable to try and see if I could get the error screen myself, but it's surprisingly really expensive to gather all the required materials for a glitch that I wasn't even sure if I could replicate to begin with. Whatever it was that Rec Roulette saw back in the day, it's definitely not archived on the internet, but maybe with some more details, we can get a better idea of what it is. Even though it's not a very large mystery, I still think it's a cool oddity that feels unsettling just for the fact that it traumatized someone as a kid, and cannot be found currently. Dr. Robotnik's pixelated error face remains a mystery until we can either get more information about it, or more people with the game can mess around with it and see if they can find it. While it might not be true anymore, back in the earlier days of Lost Media, most people's introduction to the community came in the form of a big search that gained a lot of attention. Clockman, Cracks, and A Day with SpongeBob are the ones that come to mind, but there's one that I feel fits in with these topics and doesn't get discussed as much anymore, though I've always associated it with early Lost Media culture. This topic is Crybaby Lane. Surprisingly, I've never talked about this topic before, but it had a really interesting search history, and it's pretty much a perfect example of why people associate Lost Media with being scary. First aired on October 28, 2000 on the Snick Block, the movie itself nearly became Lost Media before it was even made. It was envisioned as a big-budget movie film, but was slowly reworked into a TV movie a year later, where it was quietly aired and nothing more. However, this airing would result in viewers recalling the movie's existence years later, of which no visuals or content from the film could be found, beginning the search. And over the next several years, there were many attempts made to get any bit of it found, with some of the more notable attempts being made at Nickelodeon themselves. For the longest time, they refused to acknowledge the movie's existence, and would deny it ever aired on TV or was made at all. which could have been the result of complaints from parents about the scary content of the film. Though, what pushed people to search for the movie even harder was the fact that Nickelodeon denied its existence despite evidence that had been found to prove it was real, including a famous image that was passed around claiming to be the only piece of found content from the movie at the time. Through this persistence came the biggest lead yet, several years after the search began. In 2011, a copy of the movie was found on a home-recorded VHS tape from the night of its premiere, where it was uploaded to YouTube and received so much attention that Teen Nick itself re-aired the movie shortly after. Interestingly, once the movie had been found, Nickelodeon claimed that the film had never been banned or disavowed by the company, but it was merely forgotten about, and the director of the film had also assumed this to be the case. I wasn't there for the original search, so I can only go on recounts of it, but I don't know if I'd believe that Nickelodeon forgot about it, especially with people contacting them with proof that it was real. It almost sounds like Nickelodeon had no choice but to embrace it once the home recording had resurfaced. But even if that was the case, it's still cool they re-aired it on TV, and another one actually happened in 2016 on the Splat Block. Still, this topic makes me wonder how much shorter the search for it could have been, or how much other lost media could be found if Nickelodeon was simply interested in getting more of their content unearthed. There are some topics that have been around the lost media community for a while that I feel like I missed out on during their initial popularity, but for one reason or another, I didn't jump right on them when the searches were happening. This happens for a variety of different reasons. Either I'm researching other topics that I'm more invested in, or I just don't want to get swept up in the hype of what people might try and make the next big lost media search, and would rather wait for things to calm down a bit. And in the case of this topic, I feel that was probably for the best, because it's going through all the information that's currently scattered around the internet that makes looking through it more interesting to me than when it was first being pulled up. And honestly, it just took me a while to get a grip on this topic as a whole. If you've been following the lost media community, and some of the more notable ongoing searches, then you've probably heard of Saki Sonobashi, which is also known as Go For a Punch. This is a pretty infamous piece of lost media that's been going around for a couple years, and it's because of its age that's led me to become more interested in it, where the search stands, and if there's anything left to even do with the topic. Saki Sonobashi first appeared on a 4chan thread back in 2015, but only gained attention long after its initial post. The thread describes a lost horror OVA. It was stated to be very violent, with 9 girls who are trapped in a bathroom going insane, which is about as much as I can take in terms of content, but that's not really what I'm interested in to begin with. While the concept of the OVA is so bizarre, and something you'd really have to see to believe, I'm more interested in the search surrounding it and the likelihood that it exists at all. Yeah, the main search for this piece of lost media isn't about its content necessarily, but rather whether or not it's real, because as of now, there's no proof that it is. The original post on 4chan gave vague details about what the name of the OVA was, where it was seen, and where it could have come from, which sent everyone into a frenzy of trying to locate a copy or any evidence that it's still out there. This has led to a variety of findings from other obscure horror anime content, websites that have animations similar to the details described here, and even names associated with entire distribution companies for this exact genre of content. But in every instance, nothing was ever found that resembled the OVA that was being described in the original post. There's essentially been a divide created in the search, which puts you into the camp of people who believe it exists, and the camp for people who don't believe it exists. There's a pretty good thread on the Lost Media Wiki forums which discusses this exact thing, and as someone who didn't know much about the search before that, I went into it completely unbiased. Some of the information that was posted here seemed really legit, and I started to believe there was evidence that this OVA was out there at one point in time, until it was discovered that the majority of it was fake information, which is not helping its case. That's another huge issue plaguing the search, is the abundance of hoaxes that have been made about it, and there simply hasn't been anyone else who has claimed to see it that we can use as a basis for the leads that have come forward. I even started to question what the margin of error was for the details OP remembered in the original thread, leading to the likelihood that we already found it and haven't realized it yet, because some of the content people were digging up was fairly similar in concept. However, there's so little information that we can reliably use, it makes it almost impossible to continue the search, and there have even been people who claim to be OP that stated the whole thing was fake and they never thought it would reach the popularity that it did. But even this cannot be proven or disproven because we have no way to know who the original OP was. These unconfirmed claims about nearly every aspect of the topic make it so mysterious, on top of the content itself, that feels like it shouldn't even exist. But it's for those reasons that people want to find it so badly. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other game-related lost media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.